Okay, then onto an escalator, and then down they go. And let's see what happens in a couple of seconds' time. Okay, no, is someone shouting out stampede, stampede? Okay, and then just observe the people as they move through the space, how they were reacting, what they're doing now. Okay, and what's the problem? Plenty of space, and then people moving on and getting onto the train. Okay, so what was the root cause and then consequence of that issue? So the consequence is what was happening at the bottom of the stairs, and that was essentially people getting to the bottom and stopping at the bottom of the escalators. Now, the cause of that is then why that happened. If we think about time, space, and then information. So first thing with then with time. So they're going down onto the escalators, then getting to the bottom, and then they're stopping. And what's the reason they're stopping? Well, the number one reason they're stopping is because they're unsure of where they need to go. So they're stopping at the bottom and they're looking left and right. Do I need to get the train on the left-hand side or on the right-hand side? Okay. And the next one is the space. So imagine if you're in that space, how would you feel in that space? You'd feel incredibly constrained. You'd feel very, very claustrophobic. So as soon as a very, very small thing happens, it escalates incredibly quickly because it's a very, very uncomfortable environment. A lot of escalators you are in shopping malls, you can see widely either side what's going on. So even if something happens, you have space. You feel like there's space around you, but in there it's incredibly claustrophobic. And then information. Is there any information given to people as they're going down that escalators? It was pretty bare. Okay, so the first one there, so that mentions about the train and what time it leaves. And you can see there's only like 4 minutes until that train goes, but it doesn't say what platform it's on, whether you need to go kind of left or right. So people aren't given good information when they're moving. And remember, this is an everyday occurrence. This isn't an event going on. This is an everyday occurrence, kind of this particular stop. There's not a huge amount of people there, so a small number of people are kind of causing this issue and making this challenge. In terms of the space, it's incredibly claustrophobic, and it's really kind of limited in terms of that space. So a couple of things could be done. You could limit the number of people on that particular escalators by having some kind of queue system leading down to it. Maybe even closing one of those doors at the top would reduce the flow of people onto the escalators. So the flow going onto the escalators is less than its actual capacity. Okay, the next thing you could potentially do is actually turn the escalators off. So instead of having the escalators moving all the time, you just have it as stairs. So then you keep a consistent flow of people as you then move down. No information, so as people are entering this escalators, they're still unsure at this moment whether they should be going left or they should be going right when they get to the bottom. Okay, look at this picture here. So right in front of us, at the front of the screen is where the issue is and the consequence, people unable to get off. But as you can see, if you just go forward 2 or 3 people, they have no idea what's going on behind them. And this is often the case in many, many kind of crowd management and crowd control issues. That if it's a really, really busy space, you get a few people away from the incident and they have no idea kind of what's going on because it's very, very noisy, because they can't see what's happening, and they'll be totally unaware of the situation. And there's lots and lots of examples where there have been kind of crowd crushes that have happened where most of the people in the crowd have said, oh, I didn't even realize that was going on. I didn't even kind of realize that there was an issue. So they can be quite isolated in small pockets, these particular challenges. Okay, picture on the left there, you see this gentleman's got through the issue. His first instinct is to look back and stop and see what's now going on. Again, that's not helping the issue. And then when people have gone through the doorway, you can see there are 3 people just looking back and kind of, again, holding up, reducing the space and trying to see what's happening to people. So what we'd often call rubbernecking on a road as well. And then the girl there at the front on the right, yes, this comes down to what we often, there's a lot of psychology behind this and a lot of research done into this. It's the 10-80-10 rule. So a lot of analysis has been done and studies at universities done into the 10-80-10 rule, which is basically if there is an incident, 10% of people will get up and do something and react positively to that instance. So think, for example, if the fire alarm goes off in your office. Fire alarm goes off, most of us will just sit there and not do too much. 10% will probably get up and evacuate as they should. 80% will look around and wait for someone else to give some instruction to say, hey, you need to get up now, there's a fire in this building, we should leave. And then another 10% will do the exact opposite to what you want to do because they think they know best and they've got another way of doing something, or they want to avoid the crowd. So this girl in the bottom right is in that 80%. So she knows that something's happening, it's not good, but she's looking to someone else and looking to someone else to help and give some guidance. Yes, there's a good point there made by Raymond in terms of poor building design. Yes, 100% would agree with that. It's really restricting the people flow as you get off the escalator. So we talk a lot about that spectator journey. There's 2 or 3 pinch points just in about a 10-meter space. At the top of the stairs, the escalators with those big heavy doors. The escalator has a limited flow, but it's speeding people up down towards the bottom, and then you've got a doorway at the bottom as well. So it's physical time. The challenge for us as event planners is we don't often get involved in the architectural design of the building, and we get what we get, and we have to work with that. And you know, there's big examples. If you think of Expo 2020, it's a huge site, and you know, the team working there very hard in you know, preparing for, you know, literally hundreds of thousands of people coming to that event will have to work within the confines of space that they got. You know, be a challenging site, as it is with Olympic Games as well. So lots of work to be done to be able to accommodate all those people in those spaces. And I just see, yeah, Louise just come through to say Expo 20 has been postponed, so it looks like that may be moving. So thank you for that breaking bit of news. Okay, so that's the 10-80-10 rule. And again, go to YouTube, type it in, and you can see lots of very good video examples of this. Okay, and this is the other kind of frustrating thing with this. Once we got down onto the platform, there was plenty of space. So you know, the real constraint is, you know, that little bit, top of the stairs, on the escalators, and then that doorway as well. You notice, if you heard on the video, some people shouting stampede and then other people shouting back up, back up. So here we have you know, a group of people trying to go backwards up a moving escalator, which obviously is particularly challenging because that escalator is still moving. Okay, so hopefully Henry will be able to put up here the poll. So just an analogy I like to use. So if you have a walk into your bathroom and your bath is overflowing frantically, as we can see in this picture with this very, very nice bathroom, what's the first thing you should do? Should you pull out the plug first, or should you turn off the tap? So if you can just all quickly vote on there, what's the first thing you think you should do? Would you pull out the plug, or would you turn off the tap? And we'll just see what people come up with.
Okay, we're going to give it a few more seconds just so that we get as many votes in as possible. If everyone wants to stop, I suppose we're going to be in another 5 seconds, and then we're ready to go, and then we'll end the polling. Looks like we're stable, and there we go. So end the poll.
Okay, so what we come out with then, Henry?
So what should you do first? Pull the plug out is 12%, turn the tap off is 88%. So the clear winner is turn off the tap.
Yeah, so the analogy I'm looking at here is often when you're there's kind of a crowd management going into crowd control issue, you can very much be absorbed in what's in front of you right there and then, and trying to resolve that. But it's always important to think about turning off the tap. So in that scenario where people were coming down that escalators and piling onto that problem, what needs to first stop is stop the people at the top. Don't stop adding to the problem, and then you can start to relieve people at the bottom. But it's very, very difficult, just kind of psychologically, and when you've got people kind of shouting at you, or there's kind of issues for you on the ground, to kind of move away and try and think a little bit wider than what's in front of you at the very moment. But a really, really important one is getting in, you know, if it's getting on the radio or if it's speaking to colleagues, turn off the tap first. So stop having more and more people kind of adding to your problem, and then you can deal with what's in front of you. Because sometimes if you just pull out the plug, more and more people will still keep coming in, and yeah, you won't actually kind of make any kind of progress. So a little analogy that we use there.
I'm just going to jump in again, Paul. We're going to launch a quick poll that we should have probably done earlier, just to get an understanding of crowd management experience across the group that are with us today. So I've just launched that poll. If you just like to pick a level of experience that you think represents you, yeah, we'll at next opportunity we'll reveal those results as well.
Okay, so we'll let this one run, and then we're going to look at some of the complexities around Olympic Games operations. Now, there's plenty of people on the call I've worked with, and people that I won't know that will have worked on Olympic Games as well on this call. So hopefully some of this will resonate with people. But yeah, we can share some of the good practices of how they can be adopted onto to other events. Okay, should we close that poll then, Henry? And let's see what kind of experience we've got here. Okay, great. So we've got a real range there. So some with 2% with no experience, so 49% with some knowledge and understanding, 43% regularly work with crowds, and 7% would say they're experts, which is great. So a real kind of diverse mix there. We will be putting up other potential training you can do online. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm also looking with kind of colleagues if we can do a few more webinars, particularly focused on crowd management and crowd control. It's a really, really good opportunity. We can do it web-based, you know, and make all these webinars free to access. And what we're also asking for people, if there's particular subjects you'd like us to look at, we can go and you know, tap into some of our networks and see if people would do some webinars. So next Monday we have a risk management webinar with Pete Dalton. He's another fellow Interpol instructor, many years of experience in policing and working on many large major events. That'll be happening next week at 2 o'clock on Monday. And again, after this session, we'll be circulating around details of that. But someone who's extremely experienced in that area, and we think you can all come to take advantage of Pete's expertise. Okay, looking at Olympic Games operations. So why are they special? Why are they challenging? Okay, first thing is Olympic organising committees are big things. Typically they'll have 98 functional areas within them, and they're very bizarre businesses because they'll start off slowly and build up, and they'll get the directors of these functional areas, and then in the last kind of 18 months the workforce just explodes in terms of the numbers of people and people coming in from all over the world. And then come the end of it, literally the day after the closing ceremony, the vast majority disappear. It's gone, it's all finished. So they're a very, very strange business organization, a challenging one to get people to kind of gel and glue together. And probably the number one biggest challenge is integration, because you constantly get more and more new people coming online and coming on board. How do you get them up to speed quickly in terms of where the planning is? They don't have that historical information of what was planned in the foundation planning of the event, and come in much later. So integration across those functional areas is extremely challenging. There's always a high degree of public and media scrutiny, as you'd expect. There's a lot of money spent on these events, so they're constantly analysed. Media are constantly looking for stories about it, and we saw this typically with London 2012. It was negative, 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 and then it did start to get more positive just before we got arrived at the games, and then through the games, the media were kind of very, very supportive, and again, the public were fantastic, and the public in Rio, they really took the Paralympics to heart, and it was a fantastic atmosphere during that event as people got a bit more closer to the venues and they got closer to some of the actions. But again, it's different in each country, different kind of attitudes. There is a really high degree of public and media scrutiny, and you always kind of feel that pressure when working within an organising committee. Okay, changing political and financial environment. So generally, the people who, on the political side, who are involved in bidding for the event and then be successful in bidding for winning Commonwealth Games or Olympic Games, invariably, it's very unlikely that they will be there when the event is actually taking place. There may be a change of government, there may be a change of personnel, so you have to ride with that, and their priorities are different. And we've seen things like the Rome Olympic Summer Games bid recently fell foul of that, where they were going through the bidding stage. They had a change of government with their general elections, and then that was pulled. London, we had a Labour government, there was a financial crisis, then we had a Conservative government coming in. Again, you've got to expect that on every Olympic Games cycle, that those things will change and priorities will change. So political and financial environment. And then you look at Tokyo at the moment, look how their potential financial environment will change, or is changing right now, according to where they may have been a couple of months ago. So they've got to think about all their workforce, about keeping them on now for probably another year. So how do they afford that? What's the impact on the sponsors? What's the impact on spectators who've bought tickets to go there, and flights and accommodation, etc.? So you're constantly in a changing political and environmental environment. And this one is absolutely kind of key for me, is nobody has ever done it before. So there's people that have worked previous Olympic Games, and I'm fortunate enough to be one of those. But Tokyo 2020 or Paris 2024, nobody has ever done Paris 2024. Nobody's ever done Tokyo 2020. It is always new. And I often say to people that the most kind of dangerous people in an organising committee are those who have just done one big major event before, because they may just bring one perspective to the party. You have to be really, really open-minded. And the first thing I always recommend is go and immerse yourself in that particular kind of culture in that city. So for me, working with Paris at the moment, it's all about understanding Paris. It's all about understanding how people use the transport network. How do they arrive and depart at sport at the moment? What's kind of the some of the things they do, and what kind of time of the day do they eat? How do they travel? Do they go to events as families? It's really about kind of understanding that. You can bring previous games experience, but it has to be matched up with the local environment. And that's no different for people working on the Expo, people working at a Football World Cup, or you may be that are working on a festival in the UK this year, but maybe next year you'll be working on a festival. You may be working in Coachella in the US, or you may be working in Rock in Rio down in Brazil. You need to understand the local context and appreciating that everywhere is slightly different. So always think that's absolutely critical. Okay, in terms of game cycle, so they generally follow a similar kind of cycle as they're being prepared. So you see that I've got the sections building up towards the game's operations, and what the G means, that's G, and that's then minus months to the game. So the foundations is done games minus 98 months to minus 66 months. So that's the very, very early foundation work that's done. So setting the vision. So what's the vision for Paris? They want to have a very sustainable games. They want to be cost effective in terms of how they operate. So there's many, many temporary temporary venues. They want to be a spectacular games. You know, Paris is a beautiful city. It's got lots of incredible landmarks. They want to really showcase those and show those off. That's what a lot of the foundations work is. It's kind of setting your vision and your kind of mission statement for the games. Then moving into the strategic planning, so a lot of work that will be done there is what's the strategic plan for each of those departments at a high level. So not all 98 of the functional areas. There'll be bigger games departments, and then maybe transport department, security department. They'll start to look at what their strategic plan is. So who do they need to work with? Who are their partners? What's their kind of headline budget that they may have prepared for this particular event? And doing a lot of kind of milestone planning as well. So when do they need to do certain things by, and what do they need to, who are they reliant upon to get their own particular milestones and deliverables done? Then the big stage, which is the operational planning. So that's where all the detail stuff is, where you'll start off with your concept of operations. So the concept of how you're going to deliver your particular functional area. What are you going to do then to deliver it? Now, this isn't down to the level of a venue plan. This is very much a departmental plan. And then that'll then get given to the venue teams, and they will then adapt that and make that according to their particular venue. Then moving into testing, this is the big advantage that Olympics has over many other small events in terms of there is kind of budget and time available to do test events, but not everything is tested. So when you go to a venue, you may not test all the services. So you might not test, for example, the anti-doping and the hospitality. You may only test certain elements of that particular venue, and it's not until you get to games time that you actually pull all of that together. So testing is a big kind of advantage area you have. In some situations, you can use other international federation events to test your events. There may be a world championships, a European championships, a North American championships, which you can use at your particular venue as a test, or a World Cup event and such like. And that's the same on the Winter Games as it is on the Summer Games. Then moving into the operational readiness. So you've done your plan, you've done some testing. How ready are you for the event? So do you have all the stuff that you need, the people in place? Are they appropriately trained to deliver the role? And is everything kind of tested? So this last 5 months is all about test, and getting ready for the event. So some of that readiness will be done desktop based. Everybody sat around it in a room and testing different scenarios. And you generally start off with the day-to-day stuff like lost children and lost property, and then you'll build it up into more serious kind of scenarios. And really, you don't want to test the real kind of disaster stuff, plane flying into an Olympic stadium until you can get your kind of everyday stuff kind of nailed down. But much of that is about the communication and how people are talking to each other. Then games operations, so actually running the games. Obviously there's the Olympic Games, then there's a short gap, and then the Paralympic Games. And then at the end, what you're doing with all that stuff and how you're dissolving the organising committee and building back down again as quickly as possible, getting all the invoices paid, and getting everything kind of cleared up and off again. Okay. So what's the impact on people movement in terms of Olympic Games planning? It's very, very much data driven, because there is a lot of data and information that we're able to have access to and need access to, because it's a number of world championships in one city at one time. It's really, really important that there's solid methodologies and data driven behind how our plans are developed. And we're very lucky in terms of working closely with transport authorities. If you think about Paris, or you think about London and Tokyo, those transport authorities in those cities have been there a long time, and they're very used to moving large amounts of people, and they have a lot of data about how people move around a city. So we can utilize that to help us inform our decisions about how we then overlay all those Olympic visitors on top, what we do with them, how we move them around. And this is where you got a lot of that work done by the transport teams and the marketing teams to sort of say travel demand management. There's a company called In the Round that's done a lot of that work on kind of previous Commonwealth Games, and there's other consultancies who do that as well. So they look at travel demand management. So where the demands are and where you need to change people's behavior. And that could be a couple of things. You could ask people to travel at different times. You can ask them to change their mode of travel, or you can move where they actually work from. A bit like what we're all doing at the moment, working from home. And obviously, you know, the centre of our big cities are also much quieter. So, you know, if there was an event in there at the moment, it'd be a good time for it because there'd be plenty of transport capacity available. I'm going to give some more examples of how we use data to drive planning in a couple of slides later on. Okay, the complexities of integration, it's really, really complex, kind of bringing in all those plans together, the business as usual plans with the Olympic Games kind of operations, how do they work and how do they all fit together? And you often have kind of competing venues very close to each other, which may want to use similar transport services. So how are they competing? Do we need to change the timings of things, of when something starts and something finishes? Because actually further down the line, it may have a larger impact on people movement. So yeah, integrating the operations is really, really difficult just because of the whole scale of the challenge of the games. And not to forget, it's not just the sports venues we've got to think about, there's training venues. So there's training venues for all the sports. You also have the live sites, so where activations are taking place, there may be 50,000 people or more in a live site. How are you getting people to and from those? And Doha is a very good example of that. So it's planned that there will be 4 live sites across the city, potentially each holding 50,000 people upwards. And they will be busy all day long from morning until late at night. So actually, they're going to be busier than any stadium. But predicting the people movement to and from those areas is far more difficult than it is for a stadium. Because with the stadium, well, you know who's bought the tickets. You know roughly what time they're going to arrive. And when they're all in there, you know they've all been searched and screened, and you can influence them. And then they will go home at a certain time. There may be extra time in some of the knockout stages, but generally you know when people are arriving at the park and you can plan your operations accordingly. Live sites are a bit different and a bit more difficult with that, particularly in an Olympic Games environment where you've got multiple sports kind of going on at once. Okay, high expectation levels, and that's from everybody, from the people working on it, from the athletes, and your spectators are expecting a really, really kind of exceptional service. You'll often talk about people talking about Olympic level of service. You know, it's a whole kind of concept in itself. Scale and longevity. It's not just about the Olympic Games, it's the Paralympic Games, which is becoming a bigger and bigger event all the time, which is absolutely, you know, fantastic. So it's longevity of, you don't just getting through kind of 1 or 2 games or one day of event. You have to build in terms of on the planning, the scale of it, and you can't be there 24/7. So who's taking over your kind of shift if you're in a management position? Who's doing that the next day? When are you giving kind of breaks to people? Because what you do not want to have is an operation that's built around maybe 2 or 3 kind of key people. And if they're not available, your operation kind of falls apart. So you have to really think about the scale and longevity. Okay, characteristics of an Olympic crowd. They will read advice and information that's given to them. So probably a good example of this would be in many of the cities you work in, if people are commuting to the centre of a city, and they've been doing that for maybe 10, 15 years, it's very difficult to change their behaviour. If they've always been getting off the train, heading towards the metro, and they always go left, and all of a sudden you tell them to go right, they might just say, well, no, I'm not going to do that. I always go this way. Why would I want to change? This is my habit. I always do this. This is the way it happens. But in an Olympic Games environment, most people haven't been to those venues before. And if they have, it probably looks very different this time round, because there's all the branding around it. There's all the look and feel. The security will be in a different place. The whole place will feel differently. So they're much more likely to actually read and follow advice. When people get their Olympic Games tickets, they're much more likely to open that up and read the information that's there. It's not like somebody going to a regular football match. They get their tickets, they get extra information. They probably won't read it, particularly if they've been to that venue before. They're like, well, I know how it works. I don't need to read this. But Olympic Games, we're very excited. It's new venues. They know it's going to be really, really busy. So they are likely to kind of take on board the advice. But the key risk with that is, are you giving it consistently? So if you give them a map or any kind of information when they have the ticket, is it then consistent when they arrive at their local train station or their local metro station or the car park? Is the information consistent? So they can be influenced. We always say that Olympic crowds, you can influence them and influence their behaviour. And I'll give some video examples of that later. There is a much higher percentage of family groups. So people acting in groups, there's a lot more kind of children than you would get, say, if you were going to a typical European football match on a Wednesday evening for a Champions League game. There's a higher proportion of families, Olympic crowd. It's very, very multicultural. You get people from all over the world. So it's a really, really kind of diverse crowd. Some people will not be speaking your native language, so you have to account for that. And they're expecting something special. Because again, it's their Olympic experience. They probably pay a lot of money to get there. It might have been very difficult to get the ticket, so they are expecting something very special. Okay, I'll pause there. I just want to hand back over to Henry just to see if there was any kind of questions before we move on to the next phase.
Great, yeah. So we've got a few questions in. I think I'm gonna. So thanks, Sean Williams and Pete Dalton. I think we'll keep your questions for maybe later on in the presentation, but I'm going to pick up on Joe Ryan's question, focusing on culture. So the question is, when understanding culture, do you take the approach of educating and leading the organising committee, or do you sit as a consultant and advise/guide them? Or does this depend on which country you're working in? So I suppose it's a question on how do you influence culture within the organising committees you work with, Paul?
Yeah, so I'm thinking there, I think Joe's question is more about the kind of the culture of the organisation and bringing that stand up. And I think it's a really, really good question. So a good example I would use would be, let's say, the Green Guide in the UK. So that for those of you who know the Green Guide, or sorry, for those of you who don't, the Green Guide is basically the Bible of how you operate and plan and manage stadiums in the UK. Fantastic guidance that's been built up over many, many years. And it's kind of known as the international best practice now in terms of stadium operations. For those who don't know about it, we'll send some links about it later. Now, we pick up that Green Guide as someone from the UK, and we go to Korea, for example, with the Winter Games, and say, this is the best practice, you've got to follow this. That's not going to be very well received because that's a UK guidance with specific things to the UK, and health and safety law in Korea is very different to what it is in the UK. So you've got to maybe get them part of the way and prioritize what's important. You're not going to get a country or an organising committee to adopt that whole kind of Green Guide kind of principles. So again, it's about making it slowly but surely, working people forward with it and picking out kind of the key areas. I think every country accepts they do have to change slightly when an Olympic Games coming in, but also as someone coming from the outside, you really need to sit back first of all and appreciate how the culture kind of works. Working in Korea is very, very different to working in the UK, and working in Qatar is very, very different to anywhere I've worked before as well. And it's kind of getting used to that.
Okay, great, thanks. There's one other question that I think may be relevant now. It's come through on the chat from Stuart Tomlinson. Paul, you mentioned the challenges of predicting crowd dynamics for non-ticketed events. Can you expand a bit more on that and how these issues might be overcome?
Yeah, so did that exact exercise for the Pyeongchang Olympic Park. Tell you what, I will wait until I answer that one because I've got an image of that later, which will make it a lot easier to explain rather than me just talking through it now. So I'll start on with the next section, but thanks, Joe, I will come back to that. Okay, cultural impact of it. So in Qatar, this was a new one for me. This is the last year, and this is the night that Qatar beat the UAE in the Asian Cup. And I was in an Uber going back to my hotel, and on the highway, all the cars are kind of stopped or moving very slowly. Everyone's on top of the cars, and there's people doing donuts on the highway. And yeah, I thought the irony of this kind of picture here with drive safely above it. But this is kind of standard practice. There on their national day, this happens, and any kind of big fixtures, this happens. So coming back to Joe's point earlier about culture, I'm not going to come in and change this cultural behaviour. This is going to happen. So we need to factor that in. So what's the impact of that when Qatar's playing, and let's say they beat Germany in a group stage games, and the impact of it, we have to embrace it and prepare for it. So that's probably kind of a good example of that. Okay, we'll whiz over to Japan. So this video here is outside it's a big convention hall in Japan, and it's a comic book convention. And this is them all queuing up very, very early in the morning. And what you'll notice on this video, there are absolutely no barriers anywhere. Not a single barrier in sight. Everyone's very compliant. Everyone's very, very patiently waiting for quite a long time. And there's very, very few stewards in operation. And what you'll see is there's the venue in blocks, in extremely compliant. Now, I think it's fairly safe to say this will not work in many places in the world. If you were queuing up for an event in Middle East, in Europe or North America, you know, this would just not work. People wouldn't be compliant, and that's the cultural difference. In Japan, they are happy to queue and wait in those systems if they're given a bit of guidance. And what you'll notice, all that was there was just a couple of cones, and that was it. But again, that operation may not work elsewhere in the world. Okay, planning for the movement of people. So this is kind of the process that we go through, and coming back to Stuart's point on those non-ticketed ones. So initially looking at demand analysis. So demand analysis takes account of capacity and demand. So capacity is how much space you have available, but don't just think of the venue, think of the whole journey. And then your demand is how many people you're expecting to arrive. And I'll come on to a bit more data with that later. Then static analysis, so that's basically Excel spreadsheets working and through of how long will it take people to get through ticket scan process, through a search and screening, a ticket box office. Then identifying the risks that you have around your venue, and then building up the mitigation strategies around those. And at this stage, it may mean you need to come back to the demand analysis again and say, actually, we just do not have enough space for these people. We need to change something. We need to either change how they arrive and flatten the peak out, but like the coronavirus at the moment, where you've got the big peak if we don't do the social distancing and flattening out that curve. It's the same thing with crowd movement. Can we flatten the curve out a bit and put less pressure on our search and screening and ticket scans and check? On about 5% of the cases, we do dynamic model. I'll show an example of that. In most cases, dynamic modeling is not needed. It does take some high level of expertise to kind of deliver that and understand it. So in most cases, dynamic modeling is not needed. I'll give an example of that later. Then writing your crowd management plan, always do that before doing kind of evacuation planning, and then games time support. So that could be either operating or supporting clients through their event. Okay, so I talked about that initial demand analysis. So what we generally have on Olympic Games, we write what's called a data book. And a data book will build up all your assumptions around that particular event. So how many people do you expect to arrive by a certain time, and how do you expect them to arrive? And then we break it down by hour slots and half-hour slots initially to see when we're expecting those people then to arrive. So we go down to a lot of detail, and we keep refining and refining and refining this information. And then on the right-hand side, you can see the demand analysis tool that was built for Sochi. So this looked very specifically, it identified every single venue, every single day, how many people will arrive and depart. And on the graphs on the right-hand side, the green's the arrivals and the reds are the departures. And Stuart, you'll see something in there called nets. So that's non-event ticket holders. So basically what that looks at, we looked at the capacity in a venue. Is there any more space for people? And then we say, okay, there's this much space available for people in an Olympic park. This is how many non-event tickets we can sell. And those are tickets to people that aren't going to a sport. So people, you aren't going to go into a venue. They will just want to experience the Olympic Park and go in there. You can't just look at the capacity of the space. You also need to look at the capacity of your catering. You need to look at the capacity of your waste management. You need to look at the capacity of the transport. You need to look at the capacity of the ticket checks, and also the search and screening as well. So non-event ticket holders, there's a lot of different elements of the journey we need to look at to establish what would be an appropriate number. And obviously the pressure from an organising committee is they want as many as possible of those sold to drive revenue. Okay, so how can this be used on any kind of any standard event? So when you're thinking about the capacity of your venue, don't just think about the total capacity. I've got a festival, it can hold 40,000 people. Break that down into 15-minute blocks. So 15 minutes of arrivals and 15 minutes of departures. And then you'll start to see your pressure points. So how many people will arrive 2 hours before, an hour and a half before, so on and so forth. And then you'll start to understand where you have challenges. But don't just think about the total capacity. So where are those people most likely to go? And I'll give an example of how you can kind of map that out. But you'll know that you're the people who know your events the best. You've worked on these festivals, you've worked on the events. No one's going to know that better than you do. Okay, and then what's the capacity of each of those areas? Think about the ticket check, search and screening, toilets, catering, circulation in front of the stage. And then think of the demand. So if a band is playing at a certain time and you know they're a particular popular demand, is there going to be the appropriate amount of capacity in a certain area to accommodate those? And what kind of data can you get to help you with that, with making that kind of calculation? So think about capacity and then think about demand. Okay, we'll go through a quick example of that. So let's look at a search and screening process. So let's say this particular search and screening process can process 50 people in every 15 minutes. So that's the capacity. The capacity of that search and screening is 50 people per 15 minutes. So if you have 50 people arrive evenly over that 15 minutes, there will be little or no queue, and that's the demand. The demand is 50 people per 15 minutes. And yes, I know that, you know, it's never going to be just an evenly over 15 minutes, but you do have to work on averages. If you do it by every single minute, it then becomes extremely complex. So doing it by 15 minutes makes it a little bit more manageable. Okay, if 75 people arrived in that 15 minutes, the 75th person, on average, would have to wait 7.5 minutes to get into the venue. So that's 25 people over the 15-minute capacity, and that's where the 7.5 minutes comes from. So always think about in terms of 15-minute blocks of time to help you plan. Okay, in the OnePlan system, we've got a kind of an arrival model which helps with this. So what you can do is you can enter what your capacity is, and that's the 50 that I put in there, and then you can enter in what time your gates open, and then you can put in your demand. So in the arrival blocks here, putting in 25 and then 50, and then that shows then what it is. And then the queue, it shows you what the maximum queue time will be if those people arrive as predicted, and then the maximum wait time. And you'll see there's a maximum wait time of 8 minutes on the first 25-minute blocks. That's just in case all those 25 people arrive all at the same time. So then what you can do is add in another entrance. You may have another entrance that has a higher capacity. So what I've done there is put in 70 people per 15 minutes. And you can also on the system change the time that opens, and then it readjusts the numbers for you. So again, on the subscription service with OnePlan, this tool is available included within that. We also have the reverse of that as well. So for an emergency evacuation, you can put in the people that can move through a space per meter per minute. So for example, here we say 70, and then I've put in the exit width is 4.5 meters, and it automatically calculates for you how many people can be evacuated in 5, 10, 15, and 20 minutes. So a very, very simple calculator that asks the right questions. This doesn't give you the total answer, but it helps inform some of your decision making. And again, it's your knowledge of your site, knowing about how many people can kind of move through a space. How well lit is it? Is it on a level surface? Is it going up steps? Have people been drinking? What's the profile? Is it males aged between 20 and 25? Is it family groups? Is it an older audience? You've got to take all that into consideration when thinking about your flow rates. Okay, back to that example in Pyeongchang, just on to Stuart's point here. So what we did is broke down the whole of the Olympic Park into different areas, and then we said what level of service we wanted. So level of service is basically the density level. And as you can see in the circulation areas, we wanted a much more freer movement of space around these areas. Okay, and what that then gave us was a total capacity in these areas. Then what we did is look at when people will be arriving into the venues and departing from the venues. And the peak occupancy was around about 15,000. Okay, and that's just taken into consideration the venues. But then what we're able to do then is add on top of that what we call the non-event tickets. So that goes on top. Okay, we can measure areas within the OnePlan system as well. So here we're measuring a crowd area at Trafalgar Square in central London. You just plot onto the system a particular area, join it up, and then it tells you the meters area of that space and also the capacity. You can select your level of service depending on how dense you want the area, and then it'll increase the number, and you can view it in different formats. In map mode, satellite, we've also got a base level in there. If you need to change your area, you just double click it and drag the area, and then it automatically increases the size of that space. You can also label each of these areas as well. So you can add in as many areas as you wanted. This one here, just by example, we put it as a waiting area, and you can label it on there. Okay, here's something that we had that was developed by the Olympic Delivery Authority in London. So in the faded area of blue and pink, that's the arrival and departure predictions for the Olympic Park. In the bottom left is the competition schedule. So AQC was the aquatic centre, STA is the stadium, the darker areas are where that venue is in operation, and the lighter area is where the gates open and close. And what we were able to do is get this from ticket scan data, how many people were arriving, departing, and we also used some Bluetooth technology to track mobile phones to say how many people were in certain locations as well. So this gave us a 15-minute update of how we were tracking according to our predictions. There's much more advanced technologies now, which will pick up on the map code for mobile phones to help track. There's a question there from Harry about can you import GeoTIFF maps for temporary events? Yes, you can put those into the system as well. Okay, this is Westfield Shopping Centre, London 2012, a very, very challenging area. So this is one of the places where we did do a dynamic model because we needed to understand the interactions between people arriving at the venue, departing at the venue, and also the shoppers. So this is one of the most complex models I've ever seen kind of delivered. The greens are people going shopping, the blues are people departing, and the reds arriving. So what this enables us to do is test out various scenarios to change some of the arrival departure profiles and see what impact that then has. Very complex, quite costly to do this as well, but it takes a lot of kind of computer power and a lot of thinking to work through this particular kind of data sets. But there's an example of a dynamic model. And then what it looks like during games time, I'll move through this one fairly quickly. But that's the arrivals at the Olympic Park in London. You can see it there building up. No real queues there, people being processed pretty quickly. The challenge for this venue was really, there was definitely enough search and screening, but it was spreading everybody across the search and screening to make sure that we were never over capacity. Okay, Spectate the Journey, which I'll come on to now. Here's an event in Hyde Park in London. Couple of key kind of challenges here. We can see we've got more people outside the venue than inside the venue, although this particular event has started. So again, what's the experience of people arriving at this big queue to get into this venue? Is there enough search and screening Are there kind of challenges with that venue? What's the process? Okay, spectator journey. So a lot of people just think about that, okay, I get off the transport and I get into the venue and that's it. That's all the spectator journey is. Well, actually, you've got to consider a lot more things wider than that. How does it impact on local businesses and residents? What about city services? So can people clean the streets? Can they get access to it? What about look and feel and the wayfinding? So don't just think about the signs, but look and feel is fantastic at guiding people kind of into a venue and following that kind of colour scheme through. Think about the live sites, how they can positively impact and what challenges they have. But thinking through the ticket check process, the bag check, and all the way through then into the venue on the ticket scan. Okay, so when does crowd management start at a venue? Is it at the entrance to the venue? Is it from the transport hub? Is it when people leave their homes? Is that when you're responsible for? Well, actually, crowd management starts when someone buys the ticket, because that's the first moment you can influence their behaviour. So are you giving them information about a map? Are you advising them how to get to your venue, to your festival? Do you want them to drive and park? Or do you want them to use public transport? So crowd management always starts when someone's first buying a ticket and they get that first bit of information. Don't think of it as just around the venue. We touched on earlier about the differences between crowd management and crowd control. Here's an example again, London 2012. As soon as those people are coming out of that tube station, they're given visual information, audio information. They're not standing still. They're moving straight away along their journey because they know where they're going. And you can see there's a very big clear sign there as well saying no entry. So people not being able to kind of access into there. And then crowd control, generally more of a policing kind of function. But if we do crowd management properly, hopefully we're not tapping our police commanders on the shoulder and asking them to support us with crowd control issues. Where there is a challenge is when do you go from crowd management to crowd control? We produced this kind of funny little cartoon previously to describe that. So we always talk about states of operation. So normal operation, everything going fine. Elevated, maybe just immediately after a match has finished and it's been busy. Contingency, a metro station's closed, so you need to use buses. But that's still crowd management. That's still not into crowd control because you've planned for this. This is contingency. And then unforeseen. So that's when you're starting to get into, I need some help from other partners. I might need the police to come in and assist me. And then take over. That's when things have gone very wrong. I need the police to kind of take over, and you might be working underneath their guidance. You will be supporting them to make sure that public safety and property is maintained. Okay, all of us have been in this scenario where we arrive at the airport, we need to go 20 meters, there's no one in the queue, and we have to go up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down. From an experience point of view, it could be quite frustrating. So what we recommend here is a flexible system. So you can see here the family going straight down the middle, straight into the megastore in the Olympic Park in London. And that one volunteer can build up this queue line. All they need to do, you can see there in the middle, is just close off 2 of those barrier lines, and then people go up, down, and you can build it up. This works fine for a megastore where it's a shopping environment, but it wouldn't necessarily work for a metro queue system or queuing for security, because obviously this is kind of tape that can be adjusted. There you'd need crowd, pedestrian barriers, proper hard barriers. So think about your clients and what's available. Okay, here's a queue system in Rio. So the challenge here was that transport system did not have the capacity to take everybody away at the peak time. So each one of these pods is equivalent to 1 train load. And what you'll see, each pod fills, people are released, and then off onto the train, and then the pods build up behind. A couple of key things for this. Think about how people feel here. So you'll notice there's lots of space either side of the people, so they don't feel constrained, they don't feel claustrophobic. The whole system is operated by a couple of volunteers, no more than that, so a simple system. And it's fair. People can see what's happening. People can see how it works. They feel comfortable. They don't feel like they're being cheated. They don't feel like they don't know what's going on. So if there was an incident in that system, it could be dealt with very quickly, get access to people. So an example of a very good kind of queue system. Okay, London 2012 example, we're going to come back to this one later. It's a real big challenge here. There were 3 sessions a day. The transport hub is very, very close to the venue. So where the photograph is being taken from is where the tube station is. The road could not be closed when people were leaving because it was Olympic route network. It was taking athletes off up to the boxing venue. There was very limited time to get people from one side of the road to others. I think it was about 30 seconds to get people across the road. So this was the scale of the challenge. The blues and greens are trying to get across the road into the tube station and then make their way home. But everybody needed to be cleared very, very quickly for the next lot of people to then come in. So have a little think about things that could be done there. Imagine you've got as much budget as you need, but we'll come back to it a bit later. But try and think about how that problem could be resolved. Okay, so all these people need to get across the road and safely make it into the tube station up here. The road is obviously the middle and white bit. You haven't got much time to get people across there. Okay, one challenge in Pyeongchang. All these people here are queuing to get a ticket, but we just couldn't understand why they were queuing to get a ticket, because they can all buy it on their phone there and then go straight into the venue. They don't need to pick up a ticket. So we asked them the reason behind that, and they said, well, we want the souvenir. The important thing to us here is that we have a physical ticket that we can take home. So that's something we've learned, that actually what you should do is give people the option to buy it on their mobile phone. They pay an extra $15 and they can then get that ticket sent home in pristine condition. So there's a revenue opportunity there. But again, that's understanding culture. People in Japan and Korea are quite fanatical about having the kind of souvenirs. So something that we definitely learned. Another good example of a very good queue system in London. This is Greenwich Park. They did an incredible job here of getting high numbers of people up and over a road, then through to the other side and into the equestrian venue. People are pretty much kind of always moving here and know what's going on in the system. And you'll see someone there in a high chair who's directing all the volunteers beneath. I'll just move this on a bit. And you can see on the other side, then they're not over capacity. And at one point here, you'll see a volunteer kind of come over and make a signal up onto the bridge to tell people to let them go. So you can see there, just doing a signal there to let people come down off the bridge and then into the venue. So very, very kind of good communication across that system. And again, you'll see here from this volunteer, waits for people to go up, gives a signal, and then the next lot of people kind of go in. So a very, very good system, well trained. Okay, transport operations. Here's a queue system in Pyeongchang. This is day 2. Key thing you can notice from this is quite late on the evening. It's about 11 o'clock at night. So the key thing here is nobody is getting on the buses. This particular operation by the transport team, they decided to only let people on at the front buses, the very front bus, not the rest of them, because they wanted the first bus to go, filled, and the first bus to go. But think about that, how much you reduce that capacity down by only filling one bus at a time. They did change that after about 45 minutes to get everybody on the buses, then move the buses away in waves. But yeah, some kind of quick learning had to be done on those first couple of hours. The types of buses you use has a massive impact on how people flow. So bus A there on the left, just think about yourself getting onto that bus and you know that no one can get past you because you've got a single file point in the middle. And your mindset when you get onto that coach is, well, I'll pick the seat I want to sit at with my family because I know no one can get past me, or I don't want to go right to the back because I want to get off the bus first, so I'll go on at the front. And these buses generally just never get filled when you've got a lot of people coming out of the venue at the same time, and they're slow to fill. But if you look to bus B, big wide doors that open. Now, if you're in front of that bus getting on, you will run onto that bus very, very quickly because you know that someone can get past you, and those buses fill. Your psychology is different. You want to get a seat quickly before someone else can. And it's got 2 doors there as well. So it's not only is the actual width of the doors much wider, but the psychology of the people getting on there is totally different. And it's just purely because it's a different type of bus. Okay, we talked a lot about experience, and that's, you know, the responsibility of everybody, not just the events team, but also engaging your partners in that as well. Okay, so coming back to that example from Earl's Court, so we're going to play the video of what was developed as a solution. So the number one thing was speaking to the transport, so speaking to Earl's Court Station and saying, can you leave all the gates open so everybody can just flow straight through? Secondly, was asking them not to have this initial kind of tunnel as two-way flow, having it as one-way flow. And that really increased the capacity that was available. So the number one thing was work with one of your partners to enable the system to work. Okay, then leaving the venue, creating a pod system to increase the number of people that would get across the road at once. So there were basically 4 pods created that had about 50 people in each, and it meant a lot more people would get across the road at once. And you'll see there's never that big bunch of people on the right-hand side of the road. And that was a very, very successful operation. You don't need a dynamic model to develop that. What we always generally start off with is print a black and white version off of Google Maps and draw it out in pen. Or get a bit of tracing paper from your children and draw over the top of a Google Maps printout of different options. That's always the way these always start, with a bit of tracing paper or some coloured pens over a black and white map. That's always a way to work up the solutions. Okay, any questions, Henry, before we move on to the last section, which is technology?
Yeah, I'm just going to pick up a couple. Like I said, we're going to a few that we're going to keep till the end. But a question from Anonymous. Which software do you recommend for data analysis with the charts? So I suppose, yeah, software perhaps for arrivals and maybe for modelling as well.
Yeah, so for the static analysis, most of that, to be honest, is always based off Excel. So there are packages out there, but generally they're based on off Excel. So you can use those. But there is a system called Tableau, which is used to create kind of arrival models. But the key thing to remember, it's all about the data you put in. You know, what you put in the sausage machine it's a good quality sausage if you put good products into it. So it's all about the data that goes into the system, whether the outputs that come out the other end. Don't just get a nice fancy system, because it's all about what data you put into it and analysing that. But generally that static analysis is done in Excel. Now, in terms of dynamic modelling, there's a few out there. There's Legion software is probably the most common one that's used. Transport for London use that very readily. The other one is Mass Motion, which is a system developed by Arup. And then the other one, which is quite well used, is Viswalk, which is created by a company called Visum. And there's also a Dutch company called In Control, who have a system as well. So those are 4 of them. What I will do is summarize a few more and send them round in an email post the event, and we'll also put them on our LinkedIn page as well. But I'd say probably the most common one is Legion, because that's been around probably the longest. But yeah, you know, Mass Motion and Viswalk and In Control also are good solutions as well.
Very good. And another question, should you discount an exit when planning emergency exit capacity?
Should you discount it?
So I think what they're saying there is, let's say there's an incident in front of one of your exits. Should you factor that into your overall planning so that one of your exits was disabled and you won't be able to use it? So I suppose you've got your best case scenario. Should you plan or factor in possibly losing one of those exits when you're looking at your evacuation rates?
Yeah, I think you should almost kind of guarantee that, because wherever an incident takes place, it will mean, more often than not, it will mean some of your exits or one of your exits is unavailable, because you don't want people to move past the incident. Maybe because it's a fire, or maybe just because the case, you don't want people to stop and be looking at it. If it's a medical incident, you don't want to be taking people past that medical incident because they'll be stopping and looking and, you know, taking photographs or whatever. So run through different scenarios with that. So on your exit gates, say, right, is it quite likely that an incident could happen near this particular exit gate, because it's right near the stage, it's where lots of people are going to be gathered. If that got taken out, what would the impact be? and then I would work through kind of different scenarios, and maybe kind of taking out a couple of your exit gates, and then seeing what the impact of that is. But also the other thing to remember is consider what's on the other side of that exit gate. So if you've got 4 exit gates, you can only get out 2 of them. Well, what's the other side of 1 and 2? Is there space for people to kind of safely be? Can they still get to the transport to go home, etc.? So think about what's beyond those exit gates as well.
Great. I think hopefully that answered your question, Lini. And one more before we move forward. In the Earls Court model, what was done for people exiting the station towards the venue, assuming arrivals and departures both happening at the same time? So I suppose really addressing counterflow and ingress and egress from that station.
Yes, that was a key one. So everybody arriving at Earls Court who wanted to go to the volleyball, they used a different entry exit point. That model was just the model done of that particular area. The station did a lot more modelling, testing lots and lots of different scenarios before they accepted it. So they said, yeah, like your plan, that looks like it works fine on the outside, but before we agree, we're going to model the inside on lots of different scenarios to see if it's acceptable. So that's just one small piece of the puzzle which I showed you there. There was a bigger piece of the puzzle which was inside the train station, which was obviously Transport for London's responsibility, and them being happy that they would receive everybody in one way and out the other.
Great. And I was going to move on, but there's a question about the buses, and I'm particularly intrigued by type of buses from Connor. Really interesting part around the types of buses there. Is there a preference for which bus works better for events as a whole, or is it dependent on the demographic at the given event?
Yeah, so you've got to consider the type of event and how quickly you need to move people. So, if it's a small event with maybe 500 people and your demographic is 50 plus, coaches may be more appropriate because people aren't going to be in such a rush, and it isn't late in the evening when an event finished. The coach may be okay. But when you need to move large amounts of people very, very quickly, it is far better to have multiple door options and get the psychology of people getting quickly onto that bus, get that bus filled, get that bus away. You don't want people dwelling on a bus, thinking about where they're sitting down, have they got their family with them. You want, a big kind of mass transit kind of system. And also on bus B, you'll have noticed that a lot of people could stand there as well. So a lot of the buses you get at airports, but there's probably more people standing than there are sitting as well. You've got a higher capacity, and you've just got a different mindset as well.
Great. Okay. Well, we'll hold. We've got a few more questions, but we'll hold them until we get further on. So yeah, let's crack on.
Okay. So apologies, we're probably going to go over the 90 minutes a bit here, but yeah, hopefully people can still stick with us. And sorry to those in Australia who I know it's pretty late in the evening. Okay, technology, big part of it. Lots and lots of kind of things changing in this world. So here's an example from Rio. You could pick up your mobile phone in the stadium, hover it over the 100-meter straight, and you'd see who was racing in that particular event. So how could this impact you on planning for crowds? Well, could potentially people hold up their mobile phone, and then could they then follow signage out of a venue back to their car park that they're parked in, or back to the transport hub that they need to go to, which is great. You could do that in multiple languages, so lots of good information for people. The risk is, though, that you do not want everybody holding up their mobile phone, walking out of your event or walking out of your venue. So there's risks with it, but there's also benefits as well. But this is the way that a lot of events are going now, where they're having kind of this augmented reality to support the experience. Another example here. So this is a photograph. Well, not a photograph. This is taken from my mobile phone in Pyeongchang Sliding Center. So I held up my mobile phone when I'd opened up this app in the sliding center, and this stormtrooper appeared. It's not actually there. It just appears on my mobile phone. So great kind of spectator interaction where I could see that. But we've also got to be careful that it could be used for the wrong reasons as well, which is obviously kind of pretty obvious what they may be. But augmented reality is coming in a big way. And I'll give an example of the planning on that shortly. So just moving on to OnePlan. So it was launched kind of 9 months ago now. And basically this is a system which kind of combines all the mapping and visual planning needs into one. It's a subscription-based service, so anybody can access it. And Henry will send round a link to the site and also the login page, and starts from only kind of £10 a month to kind of access the system. And we're currently running a 30-day free trial as well. Okay, so previous events would often cut out the AutoCAD drawing or Google Maps, put it into PowerPoint, and then put lots of complicated coding. So this is an example of a signage plan previously done, and then creating an Excel spreadsheet. And once you send round that PowerPoint presentation, you don't know who it's going to. When you get feedback, you've got to update the PowerPoint presentation, and then you've got to update the Excel spreadsheet. It gets very frustrating. Similar with dot planning. So here's an example of dot planning for the same venue. And what we didn't realize with this one was the yellow dots actually equal 10 people. It's just the way that individual had planned this particular operations. And then the team outside the venue, this is the plan that they did. So you've got lots of inconsistency in terms of scales, in terms of colors, and lots of PowerPoint presentations flying around. So I used to use Google Earth Pro a lot. This is the AutoCAD drawing of one of the venues. I put that into Google Earth Pro, and then was able to kind of start to do some planning around that particular venue. The issue I had here is I couldn't share it with anybody. I still had to cut and paste and then send it off to somebody to get feedback. So what we've done in the OnePlan system, this is basically within the studio. We're able to integrate the AutoCAD drawing, so we can overlay it on top of Google Maps, and we can also get access to the latest satellite imagery. So here's the Education City Stadium in Qatar. We're able to put the latest satellite imagery. Obviously, Google Maps isn't always bang up to date, so we can get access to that latest imagery and put it in over your particular site. And then it's very easy to draw out a barrier line. So this is crowd barriers in the system. It tells you how long that line is as you're drawing it. And then when the line completes, it tells you exactly how many segments you need and how long that particular line is. So it knows these particular barriers are 2.2 meters. You'll need 213 of them. And then you can label it whatever you want, and you can see who's plotted those barriers in that particular location. You can draw in any kind of infrastructure, tents, cabins. You can put vehicles down, toilets, catering. So here I click on a trade store. This is an event in Trafalgar Square. And you can see you can then input information about it, what type of tent it is, its location, area, who the supplier is, and then also the date you want to install it, the time you want to install it, and the date and then time you want to remove it as well. We also link it into the What3Words location, and it's also geo-linked as well, so you can be very, very precise in terms of where it's located. Glastonbury Festival using the system. So what we've done is got some drone footage of their particular site from last year, and we're able to overlay that on top of the system. So you can see here, this is some Harris fencing that they've drawn onto the system. Double clicks and it tells you how many segments you then need. We click onto the system, onto the line, and again, it takes you straight to that particular item of infrastructure. And again, how many segments. And what it'll do, it'll create a bill of quantities. So it'll tell you which you can download into an Excel format, all the infrastructure that you need for your event. And you can then scan out the drone footage that we have. And then we can also overlay on top of that any kind of CAD drawings. And this shows where kind of pylons are, where drainage is and such like. There's different views we have in the system. So you can look at it in a traditional Google Maps mode, satellite mode, black and white, and night mode. And we're starting to add in other modes as well. There's also an operational mode as well, where you can see the live traffic data. And you can view that in maps, satellite, black and white, and night mode as well. So you can use it in operations as well as using it for the planning. Okay, here's an example of dot planning. So within the system, you can, if you're a stewarding company, you can dot out where all your human resources are going to be located. You click on it, and again, you can put the supplier, the cost, the time and date that they need to be on site as well. And there's different kind of colors you can use as well within the system. Within the bill of quantities, it'll list out all your stewards, and again, you can put in the supplier, and it's all kind of listed out. So you've got that all kind of documented. You haven't got to create a separate Excel spreadsheet. Signage also integrated in the system. So you'll see here we've got 2-sided signs and 4-sided signs. They can all be labeled. And then in the black menu, you can put down what you actually want written on each side of the sign. So again, all the signage and all the overlays could be put into one place. You can share all your plans in 2 formats. You can share it as view only or as editable. So if you want to share your site plan with your clients, with the emergency services, you can set them up so they can view only and they can't actually edit the plan, they can just view the plan. But again, it's all in real time. If Henry was logged into this plan and I was logged into this plan right now in any location, he can see that I'm logged in and he can actually see my cursor on the screen. So it's collaborative working from wherever you are. And you can see there that lists out how all the signage is listed. We are getting a lot of suppliers now coming on board as well. So if you're a particular supplier of infrastructure, tents, marquees, or overlay, we can have you featured in the orange menu. So clients can actually drag and drop your particular infrastructure into the maps. We've also added vehicles in as well. And you can then, as a supplier, receive instant quote requests from clients. So we can integrate AutoCAD. I think there was a question about a different type of overlay, some images, and that can certainly kind of be added in. But here from Qatar, we've got the satellite imagery, the CAD, and also that overlay from Glastonbury. We've developed a OnePlan app now as well. So this is to help support with the infrastructure delivery. So basically, you download the app, your suppliers and operators can download the app. On the ground, they take a photograph of any incident or issue, and then that will then appear in the control room on the OnePlan desktop. So you can use it for installations. If you have some signage or marquees that are being delivered, they're installed by your supplier. They take a photograph of it, and then you know in your control room when that particular item is being delivered and it's in the right place. If any of the items are damaged or there's an issue with it, again, a photograph can be taken on the ground, it's geo-linked, and then it can be sent to you in the control room. We are also able to use this when there's no phone or Wi-Fi services because we're linked into GPS system. So from your mobile phone, the system will still operate without phone and without mobile coverage and without Wi-Fi coverage. So this is an example of what the desktop will look like. All the photographs are time-stamped and they've got a reporter ID, so you know who's taken the picture and at what time. And the little pins then show all the outstanding kind of issues for the particular event. So we're used by over 600 events in 40 countries now, and only been going 9 months. Glastonbury using the system, the Qatar Club World Cup use system, and it's also used by Interpol for testing and readiness. And we're also developing new services as we get more and more requests from clients. And one thing we're now looking at is augmented reality. So we're just at the very, very start of this, but we're the first people to see this in test mode. So essentially, you'll be able from your desktop to actually view your whole site plan in virtual reality. So here, mobile phone scanning over the site, and it actually shows the overlay of this particular area in 3D. We're also able to do this where the barrier would actually lift up and you could see the flow of traffic through a particular area. And we can put any kind of signage. So if you're a signage contractor, we could do your whole signage plan. If you're a transport provider, all your transport planning, all in kind of 3D augmented reality. So we've just started to work on this, and we're hoping in a couple of months' time it's going to be ready to release. But just some exciting developments that we've got coming up. Okay, very, very sorry that I went kind of over by a few minutes there, but hopefully that's been of benefit. We will send some more information around in terms of other training that's coming up, other webinars that are coming up. I think Pete Dalton has kindly put on there some information about his session coming up next Monday. But yeah, happy to stay on the session for a little bit longer and just answer any questions that people have got.
Great. Okay. Well, yeah, we've got a few questions, and I will go through a few of them now. So, Sean Williams, increasingly finding authorities wanting more and more planning about egress into public transport, often further and further away from the venue. Is this valid?
Yeah, I think it's kind of worth, challenging that back and why they want that, information. And they've really got to take a partnership approach to this. When you're putting an event on, it is doing good for that local community. It is doing good for that for the businesses in that area. So they've really got to kind of take a more collaborative kind of approach to it, and you're all in it to make it kind of work together. And let's not forget, the transport operators can drive their own revenue off the back of your venues. People can often think of events as just there for commercial basis. Well, there's also an opportunity for the other people around that area to make to take kind of advantage of that. So I would suggest kind of pushing back a little bit and asking why people want that information. About the arrival departure profiles, but also challenging if people say there's only a certain capacity at a certain time. Well, what else can be done? Can you flatten out some of those profiles and look at different ways to work with your transport department? Don't always accept when they just say, well, no, there's not enough capacity, that won't work. Well, what other solutions are there to this? People are willing to wait to get onto metro stations or get onto buses. So what can be done? And I think the great thing about the event industries is the vast majority of people who work in the event industries are problem solvers, and they are people who want to fix issues. So I would think you're perfectly within your rights to kind of push back and challenge on that, but try and bring them along on the journey.
Okay, great. How do you make provisions for accessible guests at large events? Sometimes you can predict people accessible requirements that are turning up based on ticket sales. But yeah, if you could give some guidance on how you factor that into your planning.
Yeah, really, really good question. So as much as possible, I'm strongly of the belief that a person with restricted mobility, for whatever reason that may be, should be able to have the same experience and move through the same routes as somebody else could be if they were able-bodied. So as much as possible, following the same routes. They shouldn't have to go necessarily through different entry points and have to go via kind of longer routes. However, in some situations, that is unavoidable due to the physical constraints that you've got. So it's about kind of working out through those solutions, and as much as possible, if you can, get information beforehand about people, about what some of their requirements are. But you do always have to factor in that people may turn up at a certain entry point where you weren't expecting. So maybe a wheelchair user turns up at a certain point you weren't maybe expecting, and it might be quite difficult. So you just got to build in flexibility. And I don't, if you've got a wheelchair accessible entrance, great, that's fantastic. But only plan for maybe 80% of wheelchair users using that entrance point. What happens if they turn up at another entry point? Is there a way that you can facilitate their movement, and are people trained to it? Where there's a bad experience for maybe someone with restricted mobility is when someone at the entry point says, sorry, mate, you can't come in this entrance. You've got to go to the disabled entrance. That's a bad experience. And I think it's about kind of training and working. It's what is the solution there and then to make sure that's a good experience for everybody. And also the other one that you want to try and avoid is splitting up family groups. So you may be planning a shuttle bus service which can accommodate X number of wheelchairs, for example. Well, don't just think about the wheelchair users. You should allow that wheelchair user to travel with their family, because it may be a mother or father who's the wheelchair user who's with 2 young children. So don't just think about number of wheelchairs on a minibus. You've actually got to think about the family group and dynamic that they're with. So think about the kind of family as a whole, not just thinking about the kind of individual person who may have a disability.
Great, thanks. Yeah, and a question here from Pete Dalton. Can you comment on terminology? So we often hear through-in levels and service levels, and the green guide metrics of people per square metre. And I think the question really is, do you have a preference? Do you recommend to use one over the other, and how you see them both fitting into this space?
Yeah, really good question. Thanks for that one, Pete. So through-in levels is basically kind of an internationally accepted level of service, and what it is about how many people per square meter. But it can be quite kind of complicated, and it's readily used by transport operators to describe where they may be areas where they're expecting high flows of people and there won't be enough space. But what's far more simple for people to understand is square meters. So you can all do this at home, draw out or measure out 1 square meter. And then think about people per square meter. So if you think about 5 people in a square meter, that's quite a tight space. And you wouldn't want anybody to be in 5 per square meter for a significant length of time, unless they're going to right up front of the stage. But if you're in a circulation area, you probably don't want any more than 1-2 people per square meter. So that's an easy way to kind of visualize it. We'll send some links around later. Keith Steele's got some great examples on his website, which kind of shows what 5 people per square meter looks like, 4, 3, 2, and 1. The final thing to consider about that is a static crowd and also a moving crowd. So obviously, if people are moving, you need more space. 5 people per square meter can't really move together because they would be shuffling along next to each other. So obviously you need more space when you're kind of in a moving crowd as opposed to a static crowd. But yeah, always think about in terms of people per square meter, because it's an easy thing for you to visualize. It's an easy thing for your partners and stakeholders to visualize. So you don't really want to be getting anything above 5 people per square meter. But yeah, we'll send around some links later which talk about density levels.
Great. And then a question here from Kristen Hartley, one that I'll pick up on. Paul, you can elaborate on as well. But where do you access satellite images outside of Google Maps, and also where do you access drone imagery? So I'll just start with in relation to OnePlan. There's lots of different locations where you can access this imagery, and you can import that into OnePlan so that you have. If you take your own aerial imagery of your event site, or if you have a drone and you take imagery of, say, a start or finish line or any aspect of your event site, if you hand that over to us, email it in, then we'll actually upload that for you free of charge into OnePlan at the moment, so that you have the most accurate and most high def image available to you within OnePlan to start your planning. But yeah, I suppose, Paul, do you have any examples of specific websites or services for satellite images and drone imagery?
Yeah, so we can get access to it ourselves. So if you have a certain area where you don't have a drone or satellite image update one, you can request that to us and we can get that. There are websites where you can buy satellite imagery. So if you just do a Google search of kind of buy satellite imagery, but it's quite expensive. So it could cost you, into the hundreds and hundreds of dollars just to get kind of maybe a 5 kilometers kind of square area. So yeah, it can be pricey. And also when you are buying it, always ask to see a sample first, because you may have a satellite image that's, say, like 2 weeks old, and that's like, great, it's 2 weeks old, it's high definition, that'll be a great image. But if there's cloud coverage, so always ask what the cloud coverage is like. You might get an image of a site where you can only see half of it because there's clouds everywhere. So think about the time of year. We do a lot in the Middle East with satellite imagery. Generally, the cloud coverage is not a problem, but we do have sometimes problem when there's maybe a sandstorm. But in other areas, do think about the time of year the image is being taken. And you can generally buy the satellite images from different satellites. Different satellites in the sky have different image capabilities. So some of them are very, very high definition, and some of them are not so good. So when you do kind of but shop around, I know probably about 5 or 6. Again, we can send the links around to you later of suppliers who provide those, but that's where we get them from. Now, in terms of drone footage, that's not something you're able to buy because of kind of privacy reasons. But some clients do have those drone footage, or they fly a plane over and take images of the site. So Glastonbury, for example, they fly a plane over the site during the event, and they take lots of high definition images of the site. And yeah, that's when we've put into OnePlan, which we can use for future events. But again, if you've got a local provider, and there are providers in the event industries that will send a drone up for you to take geo mapping of your site, and again, we can put that in OnePlan to assist with your planning. But yeah, it's you can get it all online.
Great, and I think what we'll do is we'll like Paul said, we're going to put an email together after this, and we're going to wrap up as much information as possible, and we might address some questions in that. So there'll be links, some content, some slides, and potentially some of this talk recorded, so you can access to it. But if we just finish with one last question, Paul, do you plan crowd movement differently between the Olympics and Paralympics, and perhaps just expand a bit on, do you see a big difference between different types of events and crowds?
Yeah, great question. And one thing we've always got to remember is there are more people with disabilities go to the Olympic Games as a spectator than to the Paralympics. So I'll say that again. There's more people with a disability go to the Olympics than go to a Paralympics. And the reason behind that is scale. Generally, there could be 9 million tickets for the Olympic Games and 2 million tickets for the Paralympic Games. So in terms of the total number, there's more people with disabilities go to the Olympics. However, they're generally not may not be in large groups. So what you get in the Paralympics, you'll get more teams or more groups of people with disabilities traveling together. And that's where the challenge comes. So if you're set up right for the Olympic Games for people with disabilities, you should be set up right for the Paralympic Games. But what you've got to consider in the Paralympic Games is you may have your 15-minute peaks may be much greater, because you may have for example, a bocce team come to watch one of their teammates who are competing for a country. So you may have a whole bocce team of 10 athletes in power wheelchairs kind of turning up at once. So how are you able to kind of accommodate that and make sure that they have a good experience? So yeah, it's all about kind of scaling your service up for those kind of peaks and troughs in operations. Another thing with the Paralympic Games as well is you generally have more family groups at the Paralympics because tickets are more affordable. So you generally get more kind of tickets sold to families than you do for Olympic Games. Okay, Henry, were there's any more we wanted to take?
I think we've got a few more questions. I think we might address, there's a couple more, but I think we've kind of covered them broadly. What I'd say is that we'll wrap everything up into an email. We'll try and address everything that we can. I'm just gonna
just want to hear from Steve from the US, I assume, because he's mentions about can we do feet and yards in OnePlan, because I know it's obviously metric at the moment. We're a couple of weeks away, but we will shortly be able to do feet and yards. It's in the test system. We're testing it out. It all seems to be working okay, but we will be releasing that in the next kind of couple of weeks. So yeah, feet and yards and inches will be in there as well as the metric.
Perfect. Yeah. So I've just dropped in there the OnePlan LinkedIn page. Please feel free to go in there and follow us on LinkedIn, and we'll keep you updated with regular news from how the system's progressing, but also different opportunities to learn more regarding crowd management and also broader event management topics as well. So please follow us there, and we'll keep you posted. Like we say, we'll also follow up with an email where we'll collate all the information and keep you guys engaged with what you're doing. But I'll just hand over to Paul to close off the session.
Yeah, so really appreciate everybody joining us. I know it's very, very late over in Australia, but yeah, I mean, really, really great that we've had people from all over the world joining us. So next Monday we've got Pete Dalton will be taking a session for us. I'm just about to put in the link now to register for that. So Pete, I've worked with him on many occasions. Absolutely fantastic tutor. Really, really knows his stuff. That's particularly focused on risk management. So hopefully this works. Yeah, so there's the link there coming through. just send it to all attendees as well. Okay, and yeah, if you get onto our LinkedIn page, we're going to put kind of more of the information on, and we'll probably email out to everybody some of the links that we've discussed and some of the other resources that will hopefully be helpful. And we're thinking of doing another event management webinar, probably in about 3 or 4 weeks' time. We're going to get some venues in, particularly to talk about how they operate and some of their kind of challenges. We'll get some kind of different speakers on there. So again, another free webinar, but kind of yeah, keep an eye out on kind of LinkedIn, Facebook, etc., and we'll get that information to you. Huge thank you to everybody. Yeah, stay safe. And you know, the event industry will be back up and running in kind of no time, but hopefully see some of you out there with some of your kind of great events. And yeah, stay in touch. Thanks very much.